Hey, it's man from KC95 here. Good evening and welcome to Toasted Tavern. Your host, Scott Tobin, and the man called Wags are ready to bring you the night in sports. So pull up a stool, grab a drink, and let's get toasted.
Good evening and welcome into the Toasted Tavern. I am Wags, joined alongside by my cohort, Scott Tobin, on this beautiful Wednesday in March. It's absolutely perfect weather right now. Mid-70s, and Scott, you were telling me before the show you busted out the grill for the first time today. Absolutely perfect day for that. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're doing well, man.
I'm doing all right, man. I'm doing all right. Yeah, the weather's beautiful. Went out and did some barbecuing today. Tomorrow and Friday are big days for sports fans. We're about to roll into some March Madness, which are two of my favorite days of the year. The first 2 days of the tournament, you can't hardly beat that as a sports fan. So looking forward to that. We've got baseball to talk about, some good, some bad. We've got a lot going on tonight, man.
We really do. Like we said, baseball is back. Lockout's over. Spring training games are going to be starting on Friday. They're going to be on TV and the radio, so definitely something you guys are going to want to check out. Blues are in action again tomorrow night against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like you said, March Madness is going on tomorrow, beginning early on, as we know, every Thursday to start off the tournament. It's the best day possible, like you said. And so lots of stuff to talk about, but really tonight is about talking about the past and about some forgotten history here in St. Louis. It's something that a lot of us don't really know about. A lot of us don't really remember or even know existed. And we're talking about a team that was in St. Louis that is still in play now, but you may not realize it, and that's the St. Louis Browns. And we're incredibly blessed to be joined by the president of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society and Fan Club, Mr. Ed Wheatley. He's going to be joining us tonight and talking a lot about the St. Louis Browns and really what they're all about. And Mr. Wheatley, we greatly appreciate you joining us tonight, taking your time out to do that.
Thanks. Oh, glad to be here. Glad to talk about the Browns and keep the legacy alive.
Well, we know you've been on a kick as of late. We've seen so many postings about you being across the board talking about the Browns. Why is it important right now, especially with baseball now coming back, to really kind of dive back into the Browns story?
Well, I think there's several reasons. One is kind of neat because on May 10th, 11th, and 12th, the Orioles are coming to town. So, let people really remember the roots and where they really came from. But more importantly, living in St. Louis, sometimes it gets kind of kicked in the teeth with other social issues. But baseball is what this town, that's its mantra. Opening day is your holy day, if you will. And, the Browns are here for 52 years, and we can't let that be forgotten. It's a piece of history that is feel good. It's a piece of history that is just not well known. And, we keep it alive. And, we don't want to become like the Brooklyn Dodgers. Think about this. Brooklyn, New York. The Dodgers played there, for 50 plus years, but they don't have a fan club anymore. Nor does the Philadelphia Athletics. The Boston Braves have kind of a newsletter that comes out, but we are the relocated team, and we don't have a franchise also that helps put our position in place. So it's very important that we be the ones that keep this franchise alive.
So in talking about the Browns and keeping their legacy alive, let's just kind of go back to the beginning, kind of talk about when the Browns came into existence in the beginning of American League baseball in St. Louis.
Well, maybe a little better perspective. Let's talk about when Major League Baseball forms in 1876 and the different teams, because I think it helps because there's a little confusion that this term Browns baseball has got about 9 lives, as you will see. It's like a cat. In 1876, the National League is formed, and there was a team in St. Louis called the St. Louis Brown Stockings. And they played for 2 years, and then they got kicked out of the league, some gambling issues, which was prevalent in those days. So, they're out after 1877. And Chris Von der Eye has this American Association team that adopts the Brown Stocking name. in the 1880s, and it's very good. It is a big success. They win 3 championships in the American Association in the mid 80s. The National League was quite jealous. St. Louis was a large, big town, and they put in a second National League team called the St. Louis Maroons in 1884. But they just can't keep up with the brown stockings of the American Association. They're winners. The Maroons played 2 seasons and fold because of financial reasons. So the rest of the 80s, the American Association Browns are doing well. And the National League says we need to be in St. Louis. And if we can't compete with Chris Von der Eye and his Browns, let's bring him into the National League. And that's what they do in 1892. And everybody knows 1892 is the start of the St. Louis Cardinals franchise. And Chris Von der Eye's entry in 1892 was that team. But they came in 1892 as the Browns. And they kept that moniker until 1899 when they changed to the Perfectos for a year. You may have heard of that name. And then the next year, they start wearing this lovely shade of red and thereafter become the Cardinals. So the Cardinals, as we just spoke of, were here in 1892. The American League was formed in 1901. And there was no St. Louis City in the American League. But there was a team in Milwaukee called the St. Louis Brewers. And St. Louis was the 4th largest city in America. It was the gateway to the West. A lot of growth, a lot of vitality. And at the same time, the St. Louis Cardinals there in the 1890s and the early 1900s, they were a terrible team. I mean, they regularly at the bottom of the National League, regularly losing, 100 games. And it looked like you bring in a good team in the American League, you may own the city. So they moved the Milwaukee Brewers, a team we're well versed in here in today's world, but not, in the past. They moved to St. Louis and they changed their name to the Browns in honor of this heritage. And therefore, after in 1902, you have the Cardinals and the Browns playing in St. Louis. The Browns made a quick grab of a couple key players off the Cardinals. Bobby Wallace, future Hall of Famer, was the predominant one. And the Browns took off. And in their first season, they came in second. And, then they had some lulls. But the competition was in play. And secondly, people went with the Browns. St. Louis, from 1902 up until the 20s, was a Brown city.
Yeah, and they regularly outdrew the Cardinals, which as we're looking at it now, you're like, how is that even possible? The Cardinals are the lifeblood of St. Louis. But like you said, because they were able to be a winner
Right.
and they kind of brought back some of that past history with the Browns, they were able to outdraw the Cardinals. And, what other things did they do to kind of boost their profile as coming in as a brand new team, essentially, into the city?
Well, they really sold themselves. They played good ball. They had the better of the stadium, because that's one thing not everybody realizes. Yeah, eventually the Cardinals and Browns will play together in Sportsman's Park. But when the Browns came in 1902, they were playing in Sportsman Park, would own it throughout the duration until the last year they were here. And the Cardinals, they played about 5 blocks away, with Sportsman's Park at Grand and Dodier. The Cardinals played up on a park at Vandeventer and Natural Bridge. It was called League Park for a while, but most people know it as Robeson Field. Sometimes they called it New Sportsman's, but it was Robeson Field is probably the most prominent name people would recollect. And it's like only 5 blocks apart. I mean, all of a sudden you're in a city, unlike New York, where, they're playing up in the Bronx, they're playing in Brooklyn, Chicago, up on the north side, on south side, same way in Boston, far apart. And, they were drawing. They had a owner who was like committed to doing things and improving the stadium conditions. They enhanced Sportsman's Park, it's adding concrete and a steel structure. They had the first PA system installed, and there was even attempts to put a canvas roof, movable canvas roof in Sportsman's Park. So they were doing some things that, were appealing and appeasing. And Robeson Field remained the wooden structure, became the last wooden grandstand structure that will lead to its demise in 1920. And we'll probably get to that in this story in a moment.
So during those early days of the Browns, as they were winning and outdrawing the Cardinals, who were some of the star players on those teams that were leading those Browns teams?
Well, as I mentioned, Bobby Wallace, future Hall of Famer, Jess Burkett, future Hall of Famer. You had George Stone. Burkett and Stone would, be league leaders in their positions. And, you had guys come and go. You had Peltry, left-handed pitcher. He was the Yiddish hurler. You had just a constant coming. And, one of the guys who actually is it's hard to recollect, but Branch Rickey, he was a catcher for the Browns, and then he became a manager and their president. And the thing that was interesting is the sidebar note on Branch Rickey is he may be the worst catcher in Major League history. We're here in St. Louis, used to Yachty and Matheny and all these Gold Glove catchers before them. And Branch Rickey holds the record for most steals against a catcher, 13 in a game against Washington. He was with the Yankees on that day. Thank God it wasn't a Brown. But the Washington Post headline in the sports page was, "The steal against Rickey, just start running." And so, I mean, there was this movement of many players. And there was the First World War came in, took a few here or there, but then they started building what would be some great teams as we enter the 1920s.
Yeah, and that leads into the George Sisler being a part of that as well. Somebody that the Cardinals still recognize, trying to keep that memory alive of a great a Browns player as well. Like you said, Branch Rickey was a part of it, and there are so many actually big notable names that were part of the Browns. I didn't even realize that Satchel Paige had a bit of time with the Browns as well. I mean, they brought in a lot of really good players to this team.
Yeah, and Satchel Paige, 2.5 years, tremendous. And this summer, on July 28th, every year I do an event with the Gateway Grizzlies over in Illinois, just across the river, about maybe 5 miles from Busch Stadium, in which we have Browns night at the Gateway Grizzlies. And as you spoke about George Sisler, when we first did this, I picked George Sisler because he is the greatest Brown and one of the greatest ever ball players in all of Major League history. And we'll get into some of his stats in a moment. But so we dressed the players in the uniforms of the player we're honoring. So I had Sisler's family there. We dressed all the Gateway Grizzlies in 1922 Browns uniforms, replica uniforms. And I always dressed the other team, the visitors, in Washington Senators uniforms because nobody gets to see the Senators uniforms anymore. And we give away a George Sisler bobblehead. And we also had 4204, this brewery, make these special stat cans of whoever this. So we have these George Sisler stat cans. The next year, Roy Sievers was the first ever Rookie of the Year in 1949. So we dressed them as 49 Browns, Roy Sievers bobblehead beer can. The next year, which was 2020, which got canceled because of COVID, we were all prepared to do Don Larson because Don Larson, we'll talk about later, was a special friend of the fan club. He always came to my luncheons. This year we're doing Satchel Paige. We will dress as the 1953 Browns. We have a beautiful, fantastic Satchel Paige bobblehead that'll be given away that night. But so that, there were a lot of good players. And, again, the thing that made the difference while having good players was management. And one of the main problems you had in management was Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey is a lot like, in a way, Rogers Hornsby. You know, if you look at Rogers Hornsby management record, you know, he wins a pennant with the first ever world champions with the Cardinals in 26. What do they do with him next year? Adios. They get rid of him. You know, he goes to New York. He goes to, was it Boston? He goes to Chicago. And even when they win a pennant in Chicago and they get rid of him in like August, the players hated him so much they didn't vote him a share of the World Series money. He was a fantastic ball player, but he just couldn't get along. His ego, he expected them to do as good as he did. But, you know, how many people are going to hit 400, right? Branch Rickey had this ego. Philip DeCasby Ball, the Browns owner, had an ego. And Rickey wanted to build the farm system. In those days, everything was free agency. There was no draft. And it was hard to sign players when the competition, you know, is up in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, big bucks. And he had an eye. He was a genius for identifying raw talent and developing it. And, you know, the DeCasby Ball, this man who made his money selling ice and coal, he didn't want to spend the money. And this is one of the biggest, about 3 or 4 forks in the road. Had Rickey stayed and built this minor league system in under the St. Louis Browns, think about what happened when he and DeCasby Ball parted ways, and he goes over to the Cardinals and builds the pennant teams of 26, 28, 30, 31, 34, 42, 43, 44, 46. How many of those would have been built? Because, as you said, the Browns already had good talent. Rickey actually had been George Sisler's coach at Michigan. Rickey was coaching there, and then when he came to the Browns, he brought Sisler to the Browns. First as a pitcher, just like Babe Ruth. George Sisler started his career as a pitcher. And he actually twice beat his hero, Walter Johnson, while pitching for the Browns. But just like Babe Ruth, you needed him every day swinging and playing. And that's when they put him in at first base. He became a very, very good first baseman. And I think history has overshadowed George Sisler's first baseman abilities. And we can talk about things he did with Jackie Robinson and such. But he was a great first baseman, but an unbelievable history. You know, there was like 3 years in a row he averaged over 400. Just a phenomenal player. And he had good talent around him. You know, there as we approached and moved to the 1920s, you had what I would consider, and many historians as well, this unforgotten great outfield. The only outfield in Major League Baseball to have the same 3 players play in the same outfield for 5 years and all hit over 300. Never been done. And actually they hit 330 was their average for those 5 years. And on the 6th year, it could have been a 6 year, but Johnny Tobin, the right fielder, he hit 299. What you did is you had Kenny Williams in left field, who actually won the home run title in 1922, and Baby Doll Jacobson in center field. And as I spoke, Johnny Tobin in right. So they had this, you know, powerful, powerful team going in 1922. He had Urban Shocker and, you know, and others on the mound. And what happened was, you know, Sisler's hitting, you know, 420 plus, you know, and 200 and some odd hits. I mean, 6 times he had over 200 hits. You know, today nobody gets 200 hits, and they got 8 extra games. And he got hurt on September 10th, stretching, reaching for a ball from the shortstop, and he fell down on his shoulder and, you know, basically tore some cartilage and ligaments in his shoulder, so that for the rest of the season, George Sisler really cannot lift his arm above his belt.
Mm.
And he was out for about 10 days, and he came back and he tried, and he kept his 41 game hitting streak, which at that time was the longest in the majors till DiMaggio come along. But at the end of the day, Babe Ruth and the Yankees tweaked them out. The Yankees won the 1922 pennant by 1 game. So again, here's another. Besides, what if Ricky would have stayed? What if Sisler hadn't gotten hurt? What if the Browns had won that pennant because they had a good lead? What would have happened? They would have been the first pennant in St. Louis. They would have had momentum. They would have had the fans staying with them. Instead, they don't get the pennant. A few years later, the Cardinals win their first, and they not only win the pennant, they win the World Series. And the flood of adulation and fan movement turns from brown to red.
At what point then did the Cardinals move into Sportsman's Park with the Browns? When did they start sharing that ballpark?
Okay, as I spoke earlier, the Cardinals' home field, Robeson Field, was a wooden grandstand. In those days, what did all the men do? They smoked cigars, right? So a lot of these baseball stands had a history of having fires, and it really we got pictures of this tremendous fire at Robeson Field, and it burned down. And as I said, Ricky and DeCatsby Ball kind of had a back and forth relationship. Ricky is now with the Cardinals. His stadium is burned down. What are they going to do? They don't have the money because they're not winning. They don't have the revenue to build a new stadium. They're looking, do we go out to find a new city who will take us and get us a stadium? Well, Ricky, he doesn't like spending money either, but he knows DeCatsby Ball really doesn't like spending money. I always kind of say he walked the 5 blocks down to Sportsman's Park in 1920. And he basically said to Ball, you're always worried about money so much. You got this stadium that isn't even used half the time. How about we move in and I'll pay you this big sum of money over 30 years, and we use it when you're not here. The DeCatsby Ball looks at this number, doesn't divide by the amount of years, because when you divide it by the amount of years, it's not very much money. So basically, he pulls a fast one on the DeCatsby Ball. And all of a sudden, the Cardinals are not really spending money to upkeep a stadium, take care of it, all the things associated with owning a stadium. They're now just tenants, and they pay this small lease. The Browns are paying a big amount to upkeep. And then Ricky takes all that money and invests in the minor leagues and getting contracts of great players and keeps them here. And that's this big turning point. DeCatsby Ball, if he would have been smart, he would have said, no, I won't take you. And the Cardinals would have had to move out of town. They didn't have the money. So from 1920 on up through the 53 seasons, they share Sportsman's Park. But the interesting thing of this other tangent of this story is where Robeson Field was. As I said earlier, it was a Natural Bridge and Vandeventer across the street from Fairgrounds Park. The city of St. Louis was looking to expand because North St. Louis was this expanding piece of the St. Louis city area, and they needed a high school. So as shrewd as Ricky was with Ball, he was just as shrewd with the city of St. Louis, and he sold them that land at probably a higher price than it was worth. But it was Branch Rickey doing the deal, and oh my God, we'll make the deal. And that helps him. Now he's got another infusion of money because he just sold his grounds and stadium. The irony of it is that ballpark became Beaumont High School. And Beaumont was known as the baseball factory. There were more men in the major leagues in the late 40s and early 50s, and more men in the minor leagues during that same period from Beaumont High School than any other high school in America. And, Ray Elliott was the coach. And when I've written one of my other books besides the Browns books, I made some comments. There must have been a little special magic in the ashes of Robeson Field that embodied the men of Beaumont playing ball and gave them a little something extra. But again, this is one of two times the Cardinals could have been forced out of town and the Browns, we'd all be wearing orange and brown. And then, just while we're on the subject of Phillips the Catsby Ball, a couple years later, he suddenly dies. And his family has the Browns ball club in the estate, and it's run by a bunch of estate lawyers for multiple years. And, the common knowledge is, estate lawyers don't like to lower the estate. They want, their whole thing is not to lose and don't do anything. So they basically did nothing as far as investing in the Browns to keep them up and make them a better team. And that's when they hit that dive period of the 30s where, they had a team, 64 and a half games out of first place. When you went and see the Browns, you went to see who's the other team, who are their players, because, the Browns aren't going to win. But so, that was an unfortunate situation when the Catsby Ball passed away. He was all for really trying to get good players. He himself did a second. I spoke of the improvements in the early 1900s on Sportsman's Park. He enhanced it better because he believed he had a team that was going to go to the World Series in the mid-20s with his new enhanced Sportsman's Park. The trouble is, it was the other team and not his.
That's true. Now, eventually they did meet in the World Series, the Browns and the Cardinals, and really the first and only chance of a World Series being played in one stadium until this 2020 season when it had to happen because of COVID. But this is the last.
Was one back. It was in 1921. The Giants and the Yankees.
That's true. But that's one of those things. It was so rare, and then to have both those teams, especially with the Browns kind of going in and out of relevancy, to have them both play and meet in the same stadium, that was a huge boon for St. Louis.
Oh well, it was a boon for St. Louis, but was it a boon for the Browns? Now, real quick on that, one side note that'll play out kind of important later. The Yankees, I mentioned them, and they're playing in the Polo Grounds. When we spoke about the American League being formed in 1901, the Yankees were not a part of that. There was a team in Baltimore called the Orioles in 1901. And in 1903, the Orioles were moved to New York as the Highlanders. And then they switched their name over to become the Yankees. So all of a sudden, keep in mind, this is like watching a movie, keep in mind this little plot twist right here in 1903, Baltimore loses their team. And we'll see what happens 50 years later.
So we've talked about a lot of the players that in Browns history, a lot of good players. A guy that we haven't talked about, and somebody that a lot of Cardinal fans know about, is Eddie Goodell. Kind of talk about that story and his connections to the DeWitt family, because there's some ties there as well.
Okay, and then we'll come back and finish his question about the 44 World Series. I think we probably should start with the 44 World Series, and let's go to Goodell, okay?
Okay.
Because it's a little chronological. The war is going on in the 1940s. 1941, December 7th, the day that will live in infamy with Pearl Harbor being bombed. Well, the next day was a make or break day for the Browns. In St. Louis, people know about Stan Kroenke and his stealing of the Rams and going to Los Angeles. In 1941, Donald Barnes, who had bought the team in 1936, he and Bill DeWitt Sr., the father of Bill DeWitt Jr., the owner of the Cardinals and grandfather of Bill DeWitt III. Bill DeWitt Sr. was an executive. He was a protege of Branch Rickey, who, when Rickey went to the Cardinals, that's where they came together, and he told him, go over to the Browns and you can become a leader there. In other words, don't threaten my job. Go over there. And he did. And he was a long time, general manager, president, executive. And in 1948, he and his brother would buy the Browns and own it till Bill Veeck came. But what happened was, in 1941, transportation had evolved. And St. Louis was the most western town in the major leagues. But the Browns were having to compete. Here's the Cardinals, as I spoke earlier, 26, 28, 30, 31, 34, 42, 34. They had that talent that was going to go on. And they're like, man, I don't know if we can compete. So they worked out a plan with the American League owners. The St. Louis Browns would start the 1942 season in Los Angeles. They were going to move. Everything was worked out. There was a big dinner scheduled for December 8th, 1941, in which all the agreements would be signed, all the transportation methodologies to get the teams to Los Angeles, because that's when Los Angeles really started taking off in the late 30s, early 40s, and then it would really be enhanced. Dinner on December 8th because of what happened on December 7th, and the Browns don't go, and another team, the Dodgers and Giants, won't go until 1958. So the Browns could have theoretically gone out there and reaped all the riches to themselves. Again, another one of these crossroads that could have been, but never was. So then the war is going on. And if you look at the starting lineup of the 1943 Yankees, who the Cardinals played, by 1944, they're all in the military. And teams were losing players right and left. And so, the Browns really didn't lose that many, nor did the Cardinals. And you got to look at how'd the Cardinals keep Musial in their lineup in 42, 43, 44. Finally, they let him go in 45 into the military, and he was back in 46. They're back in the World Series. So it's now 1944. And you know what the world is singing? It's the 40th anniversary of the St. Louis World's Fair. The most popular song in America is Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis, right? From the popular film, Meet Me in St. Louis. But the Academy Award winning film that year starred Bing Crosby as a priest wearing St. Louis Browns sweatshirts, warm-up jackets, and a hat. Is there a premonition or what here? Going My Way is the movie. So, it's 1944. The world is singing Meet Me in St. Louis, Louis. Bill DeWitt Sr. pulls off a fantastic course of events to get what we call the best 4F men in baseball. He brought guys from out of retirement. He would get guys who would work in a factory. And the days they couldn't work, he would send them to where they were playing, and then he'd go back to work in the factory because, basically everybody had to do their part for the war effort. And he put together this great roster. And the other thing I'd be remiss if I didn't say, the one thing that happened right after Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt issued his green light letter. Because in World War I, baseball, the 1918 season stopped early for the players to go off to war. They shut it down. People thought maybe baseball would stop again in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt puts this green light letter and says, no, we will have baseball. People are going to work long hours, hard hours for the war effort. And I want nighttime baseball so that they can come home, turn on their radio, because there was no television, turn on their radio and sit with their family and just relax listening to a ball game. So baseball stayed. Good players are all gone. The starting lineup like I said, of the 43 Yankees are gone. Bob Feller, Joe DiMaggio. You've seen all the pictures of them in uniform and what have you. DeWitt grabs all these 4Fs. But the thing about it was here, the Cardinals have been in all these other World Series, right? The Browns finally get to the World Series. Do they get the limelight of the full attention of their city? No, it's kind of like Rodney Dangerfield here. I get no respect. I win the pennant, but I got to share the adulation with the Cardinals. And, that was something. But the Cardinal fans kind of had turned. The city of St. Louis had turned. They were rooting for the Browns. Stan Musial talked about that, how weird it was. Here, we've been there third time here in a row. We've got myself, Mort Cooper, Marty Marion, 3 consecutive MVPs, but they're all rooting for the Browns. And, the Browns won the first game. And then the second game, they were leading. And I always remember a play Carlos Martinez did several years ago. I think it was about 18 or 19, where he fielded a ball in Chicago and threw it into the right on a bunt and threw it into the right field corner. That play happened by Nels Potter in Game 2 of the World Series in '44, where he fielded a Max Lanier bunt and threw it down and towards the corner. And the Cardinals come back, tie it, and eventually the Cardinals will win the game. And then the Browns win the third game. So if a clean play had been made, one could theorize the Browns would have been up 3-0, which in those days was, and even today, but it's been done a few times, but then it hadn't. And the tide turned. Instead of being up 3 to zip, they were up 2-1. And the Cardinals were just too deep, too strong. And they came back and won the series in 6 games. And it was a series probably known for the strikeout. And one of the reasons everybody said there were so many strikeouts in the series was because they opened up the center field bleachers in Sportsman's Park, and all the men are wearing long-sleeved white dress shirts, and it was hard picking up the ball. But that series in '44 was the only one that Stan Musial hit a home run in. He only hit 1 home run. So 1944, they made it to the mountaintop, but they had to share the city. And then at the end, as we have said many times, the bell striked midnight. Cinderella, her carriage turned into a pumpkin. And from there on, it was sort of downhill. I wouldn't say it was terrible. In 1945, it was expected the Browns would contend and possibly win the pennant again. The war was still going on. They had this collection. But probably the biggest, and I don't use the term gimmick, Eddie Goodell, I'll call it gimmick, was in 1945, they brought Pete Gray on their team. Pete Gray had lost his arm growing up in an accident. But Pete Gray was a tremendous athlete. And Pete Gray was the MVP of the Sally League in 1944. So the Browns bring him up to give him a chance. Well, that caused a lot of resentment in the clubhouse. Players were like, wait a minute, we don't need anybody. We don't need help, especially a one-armed man. And it was quite outspoken, and it really changed the composition of the team. And, it led to some things because Donald Barnes owned it. His minority partner was Richard Muckerman, a doctor here from St. Louis. And he was wanting to do all these things. He wanted to spend a lot of money on a new stadium down in San Antonio for the minor league club, the San Antonio Missions. Plus, he was really pushing for things like a Pete Gray. And Donald Barnes basically said, look, this war is almost over. Buy me out. He could see the boys are coming back. The 4S aren't going to do it. And he was not really enthralled with a guy by the name of Pete Gray. But Pete Gray he did have a chip on his shoulder all the way to the end. And then, my one film I did on the Browns, I talk about people's reaction to Pete Gray. There's a gentleman in my film. He was a young man at that time, young kid, excuse me, who had been crippled. And his dad would take him to Sportsman's Park and say, look at that guy. You think you got a handicap? Look at his handicap, and he made the major leagues. This was also the same time that many soldiers were coming back from the war with wounds that handicapped them, whether it was a amputation of your arm or your leg or some other physical ailments. And to those men, again, it was Pete Gray, an inspiration. Look what he can do. Therefore, you should be able to do something, But in the end, guys like Mike Kravitz, who was the leading hitter of the Browns in 1944, he was sent off because he was one of the most outspoken. And part of it was because he's taking Kravitz's place, when they tried to, but putting Gray in the outfield. And it soon pitchers realized, the difference between minor league and major league pitching, I'm going to tell you, is tremendous. Good hitters learn how to adjust. You can't really adjust with one hand. And the pitcher soon figured out how to hit to Pete Gray. As I said, he was the MVP in the minors. He hit tremendous speed, led the league in steals, but they figured him out in the majors like they do to so many guys. You can look at a Cardinal history. Remember Bo Hart comes up in 2003, and he has like 3 or 4 weeks that nobody can do. Joe McEwing, pick a guy on any team, not just the Cardinals. And there's tons of them. They have fantastic 2 or 3 weeks. The pitchers figure out how to pitch to them, and it's all over. But that really hurt the team. And then, like I said, the war being over and all the big stars come back, and the Browns start their descent back down. So, Barnes has rejuvenated the Browns and took them to their only pennant. Once the Philip DeCatsby Ball ownership estate gets settled, Muckerman comes, realizes this ain't going to be fun. He bails. The DeWitts buy the team, and they run it in 48 and 49. And there's some really neat stories along the way before we get to Bill Veeck and Eddie Goodell. Probably one of my personal favorite stories in all of baseball is because I really, really like the stories of Dizzy Dean. And many times I'll be somewhere and I'll say, when Dizzy Dean pitched for the Browns, I always have someone who comes to me and says, "Are you an idiot? Dizzy Dean pitched for the Cardinals." And I said, "No, you're the idiot, because go look it up. Dizzy Dean did pitch for the Browns." September 1947. Dizzy Dean is the announcer on radio for the Browns with his partner. The school teachers are already all upset with Dizzy Dean and want him fired because of the way he talked. Zorilla sluds into third base, and the kids trying to emulate Dizzy Dean like we would try to imitate, act like we're Harry Carey or Mike Shannon or whatever. And his English from the Ozarks or wherever he was, it depended on whoever he was talking to, wherever he lived, whether it was West Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Missouri, Ozarks. He was just a colorful character and one of the greatest players. But he also had an ego, and egos are strange bedfellows in baseball. But he was a prolific pitcher, except he got hurt in the World Series there, and they then had to release him because he was headstrong and wanted to pitch. And he had in the All-Star game, he had his toe broke. Luke Averill shot one back right off his toe. And instead of being out for the necessary time to recover, he said, I'll come back and pitch. And it ruined his arm because he wasn't pitching his normal way. So, Cardinals released him immediately. He didn't really have a very long career, even though he's in the Hall of Fame. He goes to Cubs for a drink of water, plus some of the notoriety of being on the team. But he's out of baseball pretty soon, and it's like 1947. It's about 6-7 years since his last pitch, and it's been almost a decade since he was the great pitcher. And he's a kind of heavier, stockier man. He's up there, and he just was blasting the Browns pitchers. Yeah, this guy is terrible. My grandma. Let's sign her. She could pitch better than this guy. Let's take this guy out and see if he can hit a barn, because I don't think he can hit a barn with a ball. Just things like that. Fans loved it. Players didn't. And he kept saying, I can do better. I can do better. Well, the last game of the season in 1947, he signs a contract. They're playing the Chicago White Sox. And he comes out and pitches a game for the St. Louis Browns, comes out of the broadcast booth, as I said, where he had been for many years. And what does Dizzy do? He throws a shutout, for multiple innings. And going into like the fourth inning, he actually hit a single. And being a typical Dizzy situation, he doesn't stop at first. He hustles down and slides into second for a double. And he kind of wrenched his back. And he was throwing a shutout, and his back was getting a little tight. And his wife was screaming, "Get the bum out of there!" And sit down. And Dizzy knew he had to go home with, I always say, so he agreed and went out of the game. But I mean, that was just Dizzy Dean. Great story, great memories. The other thing in 1947 that's important, and it's important right now, especially next month. And in 1947, we all know what happened on April 15th. Jackie Robinson came in the league, broke the color barrier. And I'm working with the Cardinals. We're doing some things for this. Is that Larry Doby on July 5th became the first African-American to join the American League. But Bill DeWitt saying, we need good players. Plus, St. Louis has a pretty large African-American community. So they go to the Kansas City Monarchs and they sign Hank Thompson and Willard Brown. All of a sudden, St. Louis Browns, the most southern city in America, now has two Afro-Americans. And I remember Bill DeWitt Jr., and he and I have talked about this. So what was it like seeing these two men out there? He was a bat boy, as you spoke about. And he said it was different. But I also remember watching them that first day out in left field. They were standing talking to each other. And it's like, the thing that really struck me is he said, I remember thinking, that's nice they have each other to talk to. Because like Jackie Robinson, it was just him. With Larry Doby, it was just him. And then Hank Thompson played first, July the 17th, I think. And then Willard Brown played next day. And then they both played in a game together. The first time they played together in two African Americans on the field for the same team playing. And they were playing actually the Boston Red Sox. We got the scorecards here. And a week later, they go to Boston, and they were the first African Americans to play in Fenway Park. And I have been working with their team for a big display about that event up in Fenway Park that'll be there this summer. So that is something that really should always be remembered, that the Browns were leaders in the integration of baseball. And as you spoke, they will also get Satchel Paige here pretty soon. The Cardinals will not have an African-American player until Tom Alston comes in 1954, 7 years. And I also joke when I give talks, but I really mean this. The Boston Red Sox, what you learn in 8th grade history about Boston being the cradle of democracy, the city of liberty, Beacon Hill, the beacon of democracy. 1959, 12 years later, before Pumpsie Green takes the field. That, to me, tells you something that should never be forgotten about the St. Louis Browns. And, I've gone up multiple times to the Negro League Baseball League Museum in Kansas City, talking with Bob Kenrick, Ray Doswell. And I was like, where's the picture of Hank Thompson and Willard Brown? I don't see it. I mean, this is a monumental. I'll buy the picture, put it in a frame, and I'll nail it on the wall. But when you talk about at the very beginning, why do we do this? Things like that you can't forget. So that takes you through 1947, 75 years ago this season. And we're going to celebrate it with a few things with the Cardinals and other things with the Red Sox. But every time Willard and Hank for the next several years and months, go to other cities, Willard Brown is the first African-American to hit a home run. Later on, Hank Thompson is released. They were both released by the Browns. And he signs with the New York Giants and helps them in their two pennants, 51 and 54. Outstanding play. And if the history of these men, in the one World Series where St. Louis and Mueller got hurt with a triple right before the shot, Bobby Thompson shot heard around the world. He got hurt. And he was the right fielder. So Hank Thompson moves out to right field and then farms with Monty Irwin and Willie Mays, the first all African-American outfield. And it starts in that World Series. So there's just so many tentacles of history. The first time a black player faced a black pitcher, it was with the Browns, players and things. And the other thing about these two gentlemen, Hank Thompson had been at the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, and Willard Brown had been on D-Day, Normandy. So, these were real Americans, and they did something very special. So we shouldn't forget about it. And if you move into 1950, the biggest thing about 1950 is Ned Garver. Ned Garver won 20 games for a team that lost 100. So he won 20 of the Browns' 54 wins, which is pretty amazing. So I always joke, in 1950, probably people looked, if they wanted to go to a Browns game, you looked at the box score. When is Ned Garver going to pitch? Because that's the only time you're going to get a good chance to see a win. And it was shortly after the 1950 season, the DeWitts were looking to sell. They had some loans they had taken out that were coming due. And Bill Veeck, he had won the World Series with the Indians in 1948. Satchel Paige was on that team. Larry Doby was on that team. Bill Veeck is a very forward-looking man. And except he gets in a messy divorce. And that divorce makes him sell his portion of the St. Louis Browns. Of the Cleveland Indians, okay? So in 1949, he sells the Indians, and he's looking at St. Louis because there is a storm happening in St. Louis. And it's looking like it might be the perfect storm. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Cardinals are disarray. All those great players from the 40s World Series are now aging, and they're getting old. The new owner of the Cardinals, Fred Sy, because Sam Braden had died a few years earlier. Those two, Braden and Sy, were involved in a little thing. They were going to go build their own new stadium for the Cardinals down around Choteau and Jefferson. And they were collecting money and all this, and they weren't doing anything, and they weren't paying taxes on it. Fred Sy kind of was the accountant who became president. He took the fall and he's headed to jail. So it's like, what's going to happen to the Cardinals? The owner's going to jail. Their team isn't very good. And Bill Veeck says, oh, yeah, I own the stadium. They're just my tenants. What if I kick them out? So the Cardinals were seriously looking to go to Houston. And Veeck comes into town thinking, my life has been baseball. Bill Veeck's dad was the president of the Chicago Cubs back in the 20s and 30s. Bill Veeck's the guy who put the ivy in Wrigley Field. And the funny thing is, Rogers Hornsby came over from the Cardinals. He had been bouncing around managing all these other teams and getting fired. And he had actually managed the Browns in the 30s and got fired. And it was Bill Veeck's dad who fired Hornsby when he was with the Cubs managing. And so Veeck comes to town, ready, knowing all these things, and he inherits this team in 1950. He buys the team in late June, completes it in early July of 1950, brings with him Satchel Paige, because once he sold his share of Cleveland, they released Paige, thinking, the guy's already in his mid-40s. But Veeck brings him in. It's too late to make the All-Star team in 51, excuse me. But he will make the All-Star team for the Browns in 52 and 53. And Satchel had some pretty decent numbers, but Veeck believes in this perfect storm, and he's going to basically push the Cardinals out of town, and he's going to own the whole city himself, and boom, there you have it. Well, about that same time that Cy's going to jail, a certain beer man from down on Pestalozzi Street says, just like Chris Von der Eye back in 1892 and that, he was a beer man, owned a tavern, and said, I can sell a lot of beer as people come to my tavern after sitting watching a hot baseball game next door. Well, Augie Bush says, I can sell a lot of beer if I own a baseball team. And there are some tales thinking there was, how certain deals made to help him get the Cardinals, but he winds up owning the Cardinals. So all of a sudden it looks like Cardinals aren't going to go to Houston like was the plan that everybody thought would happen. And, Veeck now has control of the Cardinals. I'll stop for a minute to see if you have a question or anything.
No, I think this is absolutely perfect because I came into this not knowing a whole lot about the Browns and how the Cardinals interacted with it. So this is like absolutely perfect.
I can talk for hours, but anyway. Veeck now owns it. And he's trying to bring in a winning team. He doesn't have the best players because that period from the 44 team down, they were on a downhill slide, except for Garver. And they had a chance to sign Mickey Mantle. He came up to try out for the Browns. Bill DeWitt wanted to see him, except it was heavy thunderstorms the 2 days he was here. And they had to get back to Oklahoma. And Bill Jr. told me in one of my films, could you imagine if his dad had gotten to really see Mickey Mantle take a tryout hitting and fielding? He would have signed him on the spot. And later, always regretted that he somehow just didn't sign him anyway. What would have happened if the Browns had Mickey Mantle, because they already had Roy Sievers, who in 1949, and Roy Sievers is one of these great Jack Armstrong American tales. Roy Sievers went to Beaumont High School, the high school I talked about earlier in the interview. Lived a few blocks from Sportsman's Park, could see the lights. Went to school, was a star at Beaumont. And he signed with the Browns. Now, people ask, why didn't you sign with the Cardinals? He said, I play first base. You think I'm going to outdo Musial? So my chance to play is with the Browns, and play he did. And he wound up being the first ever American League Rookie of the Year in 1949. Don Newcomb was the first over with the Dodgers. So, could you imagine an outfield of Mantle and Severs? Because, in the 1950s, when Mantle had all his fame as well, Severs was a power hitter. And he got to the centers because he hurt his arm with the Browns, his shoulder, and had to have some surgery. And again, Browns management traded him off. They traded everybody off. Anybody who did good. And if you ever seen one of my films, one of my favorite parts was Chuck Stevens, who was an old first baseman for the Browns in the early 40s. And he answered the question, what did people think and how hard they played for the Browns? He said, we played our asses off because we wanted to be good because we knew we would get traded. And they did, anyone who was good usually got traded because they needed the money. My mind just went blank. The shortstop, 1945. Not good. I'll think a second. He wins the home run title next year. He's in Boston, and comes back and visits the Cardinals in the World Series. It was that they were always on a little bit of a shoestring budget. That comes in, and he actually improves attendance dramatically year over year because I always call him the P.T. Barnum of baseball. Bob Bragg called him the same thing. He was always attracting people. I mean, he worked the community, every Rotary Club, every church club. He visited. Every boy and girl who was born when he owned the team, they got a letter. And that letter was sent with passes, and it had a little poem that he had composed, and he would sign this letter. And I can't tell you how many people have brought me that letter to say, look at this, But it invited you to bring your parents to a game. And people did. And if you happen to be a boy, you know what you got? An invitation / contract to appear in 18 years at the Browns minor league complex for a tryout.
Wow.
How many people have shown me their contract? That, boom. And it was funny. There were certain people that, 18 years later, they were in Baltimore and actually went and demanded a tryout because I got a contract here signed by the owner. And so he was working the crowd. And what he did was, you never know. That's probably what he did. You never know. The game is over. All of a sudden, the gates open. Out comes elephants, camels, clowns, a circus. So you got to watch the game and a circus. Or the gates open after the game. Here come a bunch of men carrying a basketball court. Sweet Georgia Browns playing over the intercom system. And here come the Harlem Globetrotters. You're going to watch a Harlem Globetrotter game after this. So people flocked. So now, August 19, 1951, this is what you brought up. It's a doubleheader against the Detroit Tigers. And Vec says, we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the American League. There'll be cake and ice cream for everybody. And Grease a Dick beer because it's also their 50th anniversary. So the people flock. Now, it seems like 250,000 people have told me over the years they were there. But, it was only about 10, 12,000. But out comes this big cake between games of the doubleheader. Huge cake. Kind of like the ones you see in movies and TV where the beautiful bathing beauty pops out kind of cakes. And people are expecting that. And they're being fed cake and ice cream throughout this intermission. And they bring this cake and no bathing beauty pops out. A 3'7" little guy by the name of Eddie Goodell pops out in a Browns uniform. And on his back is number 18. Well, if you look at the scorecards from that day, there's a guy on the scorecard 18. And people will tell you, well, we didn't think anything of it. We just thought that's just Vec being Vec, some ridiculous thing. So he goes in the dugout. You don't really see him much. And by the way, at Sportsman's Park, the home team's dugout was third base. It's not like at Busch Stadium today, first base. So he goes into third base dugout. And the Browns had also signed one of the greatest college and minor league hitters in Frank Sauce. And if you ever want to see an unbelievable story, come to our website, and we have an interview I did for the fan club last year with Frank Sauce. He's one of the 4 living remaining Browns. You'll realize what an unbelievable guy this was. Not only his theory of hitting, I mean, Ted Williams would come to him to ask him about his theory of hitting. He set all the college records, the minor league records in hitting. And he had this philosophy that he talked about in this interview with me. And he signed with the Browns, and he played in 49-50 in the minor leagues. He had been delayed because he was in the World War II, and he had gotten one of the first commissions of a special program in college, and so he had commitments to the military. He was the 3rd SEAL leader of what becomes the SEALs. The first one got killed at Annunzio, the second at Normandy, and he was the 3rd to take charge of this. And he was there, and when the Europe was being solved, he headed to Japan, and he actually walked through Hiroshima days after the bomb was dropped. Just unbelievable stories like that should be listened. Well, Frank Sauce was from Washington, Missouri. And Frank had basically said, I'm not going to come back and play baseball. He got in a little back and forth argument with Bill DeWitt. He's holding out. Vec gets him to sign, drives all the way out to Washington, Missouri, signs him, tells him, just come in, get yourself in shape. The rest of the year is going to be like spring training for you. You'll start fresh next year. Well, 2 things happen. One, he takes a lot of batting practice, and his hands are like blistered, and he kind of gets some tendonitis in his shoulder. But Vec, being Vec, heralds that Frank Sauce is going to start this second game. And Frank's like, I am? I can't even throw the ball. I can't lift my arm because his tendonitis from trying to work himself into shape too fast. But the citizens of Washington all come down to Sportsman's Park in buses to see the great Frank Sauce, their hometown hero, start. Well, Browns take the field, uneventful. In the top of the first, they come down to the bottom of the first. Frank Sauce is getting his bat. Doesn't know anything about what's ready to happen. Now leading off, batting for Frank Sauce, Eddie Goodell, number 18. Eddie Goodell. A buzz in the stands. Disappointment from the people from Washington because now they're not seeing their hometown hero. This little dude comes walking out with a 1-8 on the back of the uniform, 3'7". That's, to me, it's to my waist. The Tiger manager comes running out immediately. What the so-and-so is this? Ed Hurley, the umpire, he's stunned, and he calls Zach Taylor, the manager of the Browns, out. Taylor comes walking out with a contract, a signed, legal document. And Ed Hurley looks at it and says, okay, play ball, guys. Eddie Goodell walks towards the plate. Bob Kane, the Tigers pitcher, is like, how do I do this? The guy at 3'7", he's only got a 7-inch strike zone, So he said, I'm going to throw underhand. And Hurley, the umpire, says no. And Bob Swift, the catcher, lays down on his knees to catch the ball. He says, you can't do that. And it was like, get in your normal position. And you'll see that famous photograph of Swift on his knees with Goodell at bat. So Goodell, 4 pitches. Kane can't get that strike zone. He walks. Goodell goes down to first base, waving his hat and all the thing. Eddie Goodell's a little actor from Chicago that had hired and brought down. He gets to first base, and Jimmy Delson comes running out to pinch run for him. Eddie Goodell slaps him on the butt, goes into the dugout, into immortality. They ask him, why didn't you swing? And Bill Veck's this old cuss of a guy, you know. Veck would walk around Sportsman's Park buying people beer, peanuts, soda. What do you need, kid? You know, and he had lost his leg in World War II. He'd be out there in shorts, probably because he had an ashtray in his wooden leg, because he always smoked. But you know, this tough cuss of a guy, Bill Veck. Eddie's response why he did not swing was because Mr. Veck told me there's a sniper on the roof that'll shoot me dead if I try to hit that ball. And, you know, that's the true story. And so Veck has just made most of the ownership of Major League Baseball totally mad. You know, what is this guy doing? The commissioner was so mad that at the end of the year, 1951, you know, baseball book of baseball, you know, that tells everybody's, you know, it's kind of like the old days of current baseball reference for those who aren't familiar with this book that would come out every year, the official baseball book of the probably year. Eddie Goodell's not in it. You will not find Eddie Goodell in the book that summarizes 1950. You know, the commissioner said, I'm not going to allow it. But then who did Bob Kane pitch to? Did Frank Sauce bat? But he didn't bat. How did Jimmy Delson get on first base? So there were all these questions. So they will eventually put it in 52. It's back in Eddie's in there with 1,000% on base percentage. So baseball's getting pretty ticked at Bill Veck. Well, doesn't bother Veck. 5 days later, on August 24th, he pulls his next stunt. They're playing the Philadelphia Athletics under Connie Mack. And what he's going to do that day, he said, we're going to have grandstand manager night. This section here, everybody's going to get a placard that says yes or no. And we're going to put Zach Taylor in his dress clothes on a rocking chair on top of the dugout. And a PR guy is going to send out notes on a big sign. Bunt, steal, infield in, infield back, things like that, you know, all the baseball strategic terms. And he would raise these, and then the stands would put up yes or no's, and, you know, the batter or the infield, whatever, you know, supposed to look at that, and they were told to do what they're doing. And everybody's having a good time. Probably one of my favorite stories from that game is Hank Arf, the first baseman, was a power-hitting, good first baseman. But he was a very slow runner, as pretty many power-hitting type first basemen of the 50s were, the lumberjack types. And he walks. Well, by this time, the Philadelphia Athletic infield and fielders, they're watching too, right? So up goes the sign, steal. Up goes the sign from the fans, yes. Well, Hank was told to do what the fans said. So he takes off, and he's thrown out by 25 feet because the Athletics knew what was coming. And that just further made Major League Baseball and the American League owners infuriated with Bill Veck, and really starts the push, the move to get him out of baseball. And, you know, Augie Bush is investing because he wants to sell beer, and he's got to have a good team to sell more beer. And he is incensed with Veck, probably because he doesn't sell his Budweiser product there in the stadium. But he is pushing, and, you know, Veck is trying to move. First, he says, I'm going to move to Milwaukee in 52. And the Boston Braves had that geographic zone under their control. So that's why there was a quick move of the Boston Braves to become the Milwaukee Braves to block Bill Veeck from going to Milwaukee. He tried to go to Baltimore then in 52, and they blocked that. The Yankees don't want him on the East Coast. And it really comes down then, 53 season, they're telling him, you got to sell the team. We don't want you in baseball anymore. And they actually force him out. And there is a contingent in Baltimore. Clarence Miles and them, they have a partnership with the mayor, and they put a big effort. And Major League Baseball forces Veeck to give the team to Baltimore. And when people say that was terrible, who do you blame? And I always jokingly, this is just jokingly, I say blame Nancy Pelosi, because her dad was the mayor of Baltimore that really negotiated and pushed that sale. So makes for a good chuckle. But so they go to Baltimore, and Baltimore basically says the Browns died in St. Louis, east of the Mississippi. Their legacy has not come east. And what they honor in their franchise is really when their team moved to New York in 1903, they created what would kind of like be a Yankee empire in the minor leagues. That Baltimore Orioles minor league franchise, put some of the best players. Babe Ruth played on them, and a lot of others. And that's what they honor. And they really don't. I get on the radio in Baltimore, and it's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So they left. And the strangest thing, and I've talked to Mike Veeck, Bill's son, and others, they force Veeck out, but then they bring him right back in Chicago, and he wins the pennant with the White Sox in '59, just a few years later. So you got to sit back and think there was a little collusion going on in here, right? And Augie Bush, wanted the town for his own. And a sidebar story is he bought Sportsman's Park from Veeck, tells Major League Baseball, I'm gonna name it Anheuser Field. Anheuser-Busch Field, after my beer. And think about this in today's world. Major League Baseball says you can't do it. We cannot have an alcohol product named on a team. And like they all are now. And he kind of said, I want to fight you. And no, you can't. You're a new kid in town. We're not going to let you. He says, fine. I'm going to call it Busch Stadium after me. They said, that's fine. What's he do 6 months later? Comes out with a beer called Busch Bavarian. He showed Major League Baseball who is boss. I'll create my own beer then. And that's exactly what happened. The Browns went to Baltimore. There were some good players on that team here in St. Louis under Veeck. Don Larson, who will go on to pitch the perfect game, was a rookie in 53. Bob Turley, the 57 Cy Young winner and leader of those late 57, 58, those teams in New York, the Yankees. He was on that team. I mean, there was just many guys that I think if they would have stayed and Veeck had invested and he had what he wanted, they could have had a good team. But they're no more. And, there's a million other stories inside the Browns history franchise. I'd say read the book or, go view the movies on PBS that I've done on the Browns. But what questions? I mean, that's the kind of quick overview nutshell. Probably wasn't as quick, but it was the overview.
That was great. You got a lot of information like we said, there's a lot of people that don't know a lot about the history. So that was amazing. Hour and 20 minutes. You just filled.
Wow, that long, huh?
You gave a lot of people a lot of information, which is great.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I didn't know a whole lot about the Browns. I knew that they'd been here. I knew they played the Cardinals in the World Series, but just the backstory of it is incredible. And like you said, just the amount of threads that come out of that. The fact that the original Orioles are actually the Yankees, and now the Browns, who were in Milwaukee, came to St. Louis, and now they're the Orioles. Just everything that kind of connects together, and the background stories is amazing.
It is. I mean, it's an amazing story, and there's so many things you look back as I kind of threw out that tale. What if this would have happened? Or what if that would have happened? What if Ricky would have built the farm system? What if Sisler wouldn't have got hurt? What if they went to Los Angeles? Many, many, many stories.
I think the biggest one for me is, I mean, they're all big ones, but just the fact that Mickey Mantle possibly could have been a guy that was in St. Louis as a Brown and maybe would have kept them here. And like you said, maybe forcing the Cardinals to go somewhere else. Just the tangents you could go off on are incredible.
Well, there's other players, Yogi Berra. The Browns wanted to sign Yogi Berra. And there's a whole different story about how the Yankees got Yogi Berra. It's quite interesting. I mean, there's just such a, and the thing of it was the Browns were just, I'll be honest with you, they're 52 years. They lost 1,000 more games than they won. A lot of those games were lost heavily in the 30s because the state over purview of these lawyers didn't know anything about baseball. But they were the lovable losers before the Cubs were ever the lovable losers. People just believed in them. They came. And, the other thing that kind of irks me as well is people, their attendance, Well, they go pointing out the attendance of the Browns. And we've done a lot of writing, and other writers have called me and talked about this, and they've written things. You got to remember this thing of 3 million people in the stands, that really doesn't start until the late 80s. And if you go look at attendance figures, of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 400 or 500 is a good year. One, the war was going on with rationing in the 40s. In the 30s, you had the Great Depression, and people didn't have money for food, much less to go to a ball game. A lot of kids turned into Browns fans because the Browns had the Brownie Brigade cards. The Cardinals had the Knothole Gang. The Brownies had the Brownie Brigade, but the Browns had a boys' Brownie Brigade and a girls' Brownie Brigade. They all got them. The Cardinals only gave the Knothole Gang out to the kids. Plus, you sat in a better section on a Browns game than you did. You were confined up to the upper left field, outfield grandstands when you were in the Cardinals. So there was this love, and we have luncheons. The Browns fan club, as I spoke. It just amazes me that we're doing this. Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Boston, they're not doing this, but we have luncheons still today. 400 plus people come. Wow. I have round tables where we'll pick a topic, and people will bring memorabilia from that era because I want it to be like show and tell when you're in third grade, and we do that. We did a round table a couple of years ago on George Sisler. His kids came and talked, his grandkids, and brought a lot of his memorabilia. One guy walks in with the game used bat of the eight-player starting lineup of the 1922 Browns, which we talked about was so great. So one guy had a uniform, a game-used uniform from the 1922 Browns. There are tons of autographed balls or autographed programs or pictures, and we'll get 100, 150 people come to these little round tables that we just have on a Saturday afternoon in January or a Saturday afternoon in November, kind of our own hot stove league type things. And, we'll have Zoom calls like this one I spoke of with Frank Sauce. And, we put them on our website, thestlbrowns.com. You can go there and check out our website and all the things we have on there, the histories, the videos, as I spoke of, merchandise, all kinds of things. So it's pretty amazing. And I just get asked all the time, and how is this still happening when these others? And I think two things is that one, the love of baseball in the city of St. Louis, even though a bunch of people fly in from all over the country to come to our luncheons, and we will fill the Grizzly Stadium with everybody in Browns hats and T-shirts and jerseys when we have our Browns night at them. But it's this love of baseball in St. Louis. And it was always the lovable loser that this might be the year. This might be the year. And people stuck by him. And it's something that, my mission is to make sure it doesn't go away.
Oh, you've been doing a great job so far, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things that have stuck out for me. I'm from Washington, Missouri, so that's a little Browns history that I didn't know because I grew up in Washington. So I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit. And then the other thing, we've done a roundtable with Dr. Doswell at the Negro League Museum the last couple of years. Did not know about the connection with the Browns and the Negro League that early. So that's something we'll have to bring up with them the next time we do that as well. Just stuff did not know.
Well, I'm glad we learned something tonight.
And
Absolutely.
And we have to now figure out a way to get Ed and Doswell and Kendrick all together on our show and have a huge roundtable. That's what we need to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I've know them both and everything's fine. Let's do it.
I think we can set it up. We know you've been with us an hour and a half. That's a long time. We don't want to keep you super long. But I do want to pivot a little bit away from the Browns because you also have a little bit of love and a little bit of intrigue and insight into something else that St. Louis has been kind of a underdog portion of, and that's professional wrestling. And you wrote a book about wrestling at the Chase, and I really just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the influence that St. Louis, as a whole, has had on the wrestling community and really, propelling professional wrestling forward.
Well, I don't think there's a question. I've written several other books. One on the history of St. Louis amateur baseball, little leagues to major leagues, and that whole sort of why it's so great and how they come in. When the pandemic came, I've spoken at Cooperstown a couple of times, and they closed with real quick in the pandemic, and the archivists were furloughed for a couple of books I'm working on, and I was presented this opportunity to do a book on wrestling at the Chase. My books are like coffee table books, 500-700 pictures in there, and all my stories. And, they've won a bunch of awards. Our Browns book was picked as the best book published in 2017 on baseball. And I've, won some others that were the top 25 of 2020. And I was asked to do this book on wrestling at the Chase, and I watched it growing up, but I wasn't a diehard fan. I'm not a diehard fan of the WWE, but, I was talking to Bob Costas, and he's like, oh, man, you ought to do that. And, there's a lot of stories. And then I started talking to the Garagiola family, Larry Matisek's family. Larry was the announcer. The Sam Muchnick family. And they all asked, please do it, and, my films, I've got Emmy Awards from my PBS films. Would you please do this? And I was like, well, I don't know if I can get the stuff I need. Well, Sam Muchnick kids gave me all his stuff. Larry Matisek family gave me all his stuff. Herb Simmons, who was Larry Matisek's best friend, gave me Larry's stuff. Larry had always wanted this book, his wife said, and he passed away. So it was to do this tribute, and it has been an amazing ride. Wrestling at the Chase, people got to remember, was unique. First of all, St. Louis was the wrestling capital of the world for 30 years. It was here because Sam Muchnick was here, and he ran the NWA all over the world. So everything came through St. Louis. And this setting of the NWA and how they toured one champion and kept the talent new and fresh was new. And he would fill Kiel Auditorium with, 15,000 people on Friday nights throughout the month with matches. And parallel to wrestling, this stable of this, there was more popularity with wrestling and revenue generated in the 40s and 50s than baseball, football, and basketball combined. Wow. You got to remember, people didn't have all these TVs, and a lot of bars would install TVs, and people would hang out in the bars just to see a TV, and they kept wrestling program on. Wrestling started getting oversaturated and a little stale in the late 50s. And parallel to that, Harold Koppler his family had built the Chase Park Plaza facility down there. He built the Park Plaza, then he bought the Chase, and he combined it. His father, Sam Koppler. Harold Koppler is renovating. He's got the most opulent hotel. I mean, the Chase Park Plaza was, the moniker of the early 60s. The Chase is the place, right? And it had one of the top 5 cabarets in the country, the Chase Club, and anybody who was anybody not only would stay at the Chase, but they would perform there. Frank Sinatra, Rosemary Clooney, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Nat King Cole, and I got all the pictures and all the stories about them there. All the baseball players would stay there, the baseball teams. I mean, I was able, a friend of my mother-in-law's, her husband is a busboy in the early 50s, excuse me. He worked as a busboy, and he would get these programs, get Frank Sinatra to sign his program. But he would take every morning the daily menu, and he would pass it down the table and ask everybody to sign it. June 23rd, 1952, the Yankees are in town. Casey Stingo, Mickey Mantle. There's 8 Hall of Famers on that menu, plus the whole team. And then would come Connie Max. I mean, the Chase was the place, President's Queens, anybody. And they had this Coruscant room with these fantastic chandeliers. And these wrestlers are used to playing in dark, dank VFW halls or small, Animal Palace arenas. And now they're in this unbelievable Coruscant room under these unbelievable chandeliers where the biggest social events of St. Louis society take place. The Veiled Prophet, the Black Tie Muni Balls, everything, all the business socials there. And now you got wrestling. I mean, people were in awe of the Chase Park Plaza. Joe Garagiola said, we would live about a mile and a half down on the hill from the Chase. And we would drive by it all the time, and we're in awe. And as a family, we'd always say, when we win the lottery, we're going to go to the Chase. That's what it meant. And when wrestling first came there, besides all this opulence and everything, now all the people who could never afford to go there are now invited in. It's a great equalizer because they're sitting shoulder to shoulder via the TV picture with all St. Louis's finest, dressed to the nines, the women in evening gowns and evening gloves, men in tuxedos and suits are all sitting ringside, and they're battling, to get the best seat so they can be seen on the cameras, the lawyers, the doctors, the big shot businessmen of St. Louis. Joe Garagiola called them closet fans. And, maybe the woman would get a little spritz of spit or sweat on her, but, that's battle scars, and that was what was the most amazing thing. And this show ran for almost 30 years, from 1959. It went to 1983. And what it, Sam Muchnick ran it like a business. And I never heard of all the people and all the wrestlers that I interviewed and said, no one has ever said anything negative. And all you ever heard was, if you wanted to be anybody in the business, you had to be there. You had to wrestle at the Chase and Keel for Sam Muchnick. That's how you got good. And it was this premier event. I mean, only the local news or Cardinal baseball had more viewership than wrestling at the Chase. And it was this must-see TV. Remember that old moniker from NBC, must-see TV? Wrestling at the Chase was must-see TV, whether it was Saturday night. And everybody's got stories. Because it was also a different time. It was 1959, the early 60s. If you were lucky, you had one television. Nobody really had two televisions. Couldn't afford them. And secondly, you didn't have big houses with living rooms, family rooms. You had a front room, a small front room, because houses were very small. So you also only had 3 television stations until Channel 11. So when Koppler not only had the hotel in 1959, April 59, he creates Channel 11. And, he really didn't at first have any programming. He would actually, King Quality Dairy presents Corey League baseball games on Channel 11 because he didn't have anything to show. Then he got the Three Stooges. And then he started picking up some programs. He picked up some really poor movies from Hollywood. He thought he had a good deal, but the movies were so bad nobody wanted to watch him. We would watch him. So Muchnick and Koppler are flying back, and they happen to be on the same plane to St. Louis. And they got talking, and Muchnick says, I need to add some sex and jazz up wrestling. And I don't mean sexy as, girls and things. I mean, make it really appealing to people to watch. I mean, these were gladiators fighting. Most of them were all former college players or NFL players. I mean, one of my favorite pictures in my book is Dick the Bruiser when he played for the Green Bay Packers in the early 50s. I got the team picture in the book, and Dick is bigger than everybody else on the team. Just a mammoth kind of guy. And he, he's putting everybody together. And they decide, Koppler, I got a television network, which will soon be the number one independent television station in America. I got a fantastic anybody has ever had. And Muchnick saying, well, I want something jazzy for my program. And on a little TWA napkin, they wrote out the deal. And it lasted, like I said, almost 3 decades. And said, well, I go off and retired in January 1st, 1980. Retired. And the world's changing for him. He wanted this to be like gladiators, good versus evil, fighting each other. And remember in the 80s, video games came out, that fast pace of our society, the sensationalism, all of that, sex appeal, think about the movies from the 80s that you could never watch now, all of that. Muchnick didn't want that. But Vince McMahon's dad had been a protege promoter of Muchnick's back during all this period. Muchnick ran the NWA. And basically, whether you like it or not, I'll give him the credit because he's got $1 billion a year business, right? He made it all come together, and that's became the WWE because society and social ways changed, and he took advantage of cable TV, the video-ness, the sexiness, all that, package this, Muchnick didn't like the talk outside the ring. He wanted it inside, and that's really how this great program, led by guys like Larry Messick. Joe Garagiola for 3 years was the ringside announcer before he left to go to the Today Show. His brother, Mickey Garagiola, was one of the, the greatest sidekicks there could be for wrestling at the Chase. There's just so many Mickey stories, Mickey quips. And all the great wrestlers came through St. Louis.
Well, Scott, you got anything else before we wrap up here? Because that's a ton of amazing stuff that we've had so far tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Just some great stories. Just a lot of information, a lot of stories that people wouldn't get to hear otherwise. So we're really, really thankful that you came on with us tonight, Ed.
Well, you guys said make it as long as we wanted. I didn't know. I wasn't paying attention to the time.
No, you're good. You're good. So once again, you mentioned the website before, but tell us once again where people can find you and what you may have coming up here in the next couple of months.
As I said, at the stlbrowns.com is our Browns website. I got a lot of things on a lot of different fronts. You can get them off my Facebook page or thewrestlingbook.com. STL Wrestling Book, excuse me. STLWrestlingBook.com is our wrestling stories. And what we've got for, I'm working out a thing with the Cardinals for May 12th. It's an afternoon game that we will celebrate the Browns as they play the Orioles. July 28th is Browns night at the Gateway Grizzlies honoring Satchel Paige, and hopefully Satchel's children will be there with us to celebrate Satchel and the Satchel Paige bobblehead. We will have our annual luncheon. I'm working the details. I don't have the specifics yet. Mike Veck was coming last year, and at the last minute he had to cancel. And he said he'd come this year, so we got to work on a date for that. And that will be sometime in August or September. On the wrestling front, I'm doing book talks and signings a lot that I post. But the big thing is as I spoke, we've got those 2 Emmy movies on baseball. Right now, the tentative date is June 4th to premiere a PBS movie on Wrestling at the Chase based on my book. And I have gone through looking at some of the pieces of film as we're putting it together, and it's an outstanding story. You'll be blown away by the story on top of what I just spoke to you about.
Yeah, we don't want to give it all away. You got to watch the movie.
Right.
You have to watch it. So, well, Ed, once again, thank you for coming on. You're welcome anytime that you want to come on, and we'll definitely have to get something set up between us and you and the Negro League Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum as well. That should be a really fun thing to do as well.
Oh, anytime. I'm ready, buddy.
All righty. Well, that's Ed Wheatley.
About wrestling before the movie comes out.
What's that?
Maybe we can talk about wrestling a little bit before the movie.
Sure.
Give you an update on the Satchel Paige night.
We can, yeah, because we've got a buddy or two that actually are really, really big wrestling fans. That if we get something set up talking about wrestling, they'll want to be involved in some way, shape, or form. So we definitely will.
Sounds good. We'll stay in touch.
We certainly will. Ed Wheatley, president of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society and Fan Club. It was awesome having him on. And I don't know why I'm so much bigger than you, Scott, because we're both equal partners in this. But once again, just an amazing historical walk down a lane that a lot of us don't really know about. And now I'm even more excited to kind of dive back down into the history of baseball and really the history of the Browns in itself and how they've affected the Cardinals' trajectory in the entire time that they've been around.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of great information. I hope people really watch this. Almost need to watch it a couple of times because there was so much in-depth information, which is great because there is a great history with the Browns, like you said, and they were the premier baseball team in St. Louis for a while. So, people really need to dig into that history and understand what the Browns meant to this city.
Certainly do. And check out the website, check out the films as well. PBS ran one just recently, and I'm actually going to probably watch it on YouTube again tomorrow because it looks so good, and to be able to kind of connect all these pieces again would be phenomenal for me as a baseball fan itself. So you got anything before we head out tonight, man? I know we've been talking sports for a while now, but what else you got on your mind?
Not a whole lot, man. Like we said, got basketball starting tomorrow. There's a lot of free agent signings going on in baseball. Football free agency is going on. So we'll here in the next couple of days, we'll have to try to get back together and dig into that, especially once the tournament gets going. And we need to let people know, too, it's still not too late to sign up for our bracket challenge for the NCAA tournament. You can win some stuff, a gift certificate from St. Louis Sports Co. I think we've got a little package coming from Toasted Tavern as well. So still got some time to sign up, about 12 hours still till the tournament tips off.
Yes, get in there, get your brackets set, and compete and see if you can beat us because, we like to brag that we know about sports, but now you can prove that you know more than us.
Real quick, Wags, who you got in your finals?
You know what? Let me pull it up real quick. I know I got Gonzaga and hold on. I should have had this ready to go. My final four is I know it's going to sound really bad because it's all chalk. It's Arizona, Kansas, Gonzaga, and Kentucky. Gonzaga, Arizona in the final with Gonzaga winning it.
See, I got Arizona, Kentucky, Gonzaga, and Villanova. And I went different than just about everybody else. I got Kentucky and Villanova in my finals with Kentucky winning the national championship.
Hey, you know what? It's been a few years since they've won something, and it would not be out of the realm of possibility the way that the college basketball season has gone to see something like that. My heart's always going to lie with North Carolina because I'm a Tar Heel through and through. Absolutely love them. I don't think they're going to do very well after the first round. That's a tough matchup tomorrow, but I think they at least win one game. I got Indiana in one of the in an upset this well. I think they're playing decently well right now. I'd like to see them possibly win that 12-5 matchup. And Tom Ackerman, don't worry, I got you back on that one. I got Indiana winning that game. So, plenty of action going on starting tomorrow. Baseball's back, like we said. Blues play against the Penguins tomorrow night. So we'll be back with you as soon as we possibly can to kind of recap all of that stuff. So at the very least, you'll see us on Monday night, if not before then. So we want to thank Ed Wheatley again for joining us. Make sure you check out everything St. Louis Browns. Get up to date on that history, and then be prepared for when the Orioles come to town and the celebration that we have with that. Satchel Paige Day at the Gateway Grizzlies, and other things. We'll have wrestling talk coming up as well, again with Ed, before his movie premieres on PBS for Wrestling at the Chase as well. So for Scott, I am Wags. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys very, very soon.
Hey, it's you-man here from Casey. For all your sports news, catch the Toasted Tavern with Scott Tobin and the man called Wags, weeknights at 9 p.m. You can follow Toasted Tavern on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Let's get toasted.